Okay, so welcome and thank you all for joining us today for this timely panel discussion on why representation matters. Our hope is that this session will allow us to have an open discussion on why diversity is important, what needs to change, and provide a space where students and professionals alike can learn how to advocate for diversity and inclusion in their area of expertise. My name is Marissa Lustry, and I'm a program assistant at Nutrition Connections, a center within the Ontario Public Health Association. Before we get underway, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we are working from and the traditional people of this land. I am currently working in Toronto and would like to acknowledge that this is the land of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. We recognize that Indigenous practices of health and well-being have been in place on this territory for thousands of years and are maintained to this day. As a settler, I'm grateful to have an opportunity to work on this land. To learn more, I have pasted a website link called nativeland.ca into the chat. This website is run by a not-for-profit organization, Native Land Digital, and can be a resource to help you learn about the Indigenous lands you live, work, and go to school on. We are pleased to see the huge turnout at today's webinar and recognize that not everyone attending is familiar with our organization, Nutrition Connections. Our team works to provide services to health professionals, businesses, government, and community organizations, educators, researchers, and others working in food and nutrition to help them learn, connect, and share information. Nutrition Connections is a key program of the Ontario Public Health Association, which is recognized as a charitable not-for-profit. As a registered charity, all the proceeds from the sale of our resources and services go towards work that promotes public education on nutrition and healthy eating. At this time, I'd like to go through some housekeeping items. You may have noticed that there are some different bottoms along the bottom of your screen. We ask that if you have a technology-related questions that you please submit that inquiry through the chat box. If you have a question for our panelists at any point in the discussion, please submit those through the Q&A box. Some of you might be aware that we had originally planned to host a forum over a 3-day period in the early new year. However, we ultimately decided to reformat our sessions into a webinar series. I'd like to thank our steering committee members pictured here and on the line joining us right now for their hard work and flexibility over the last 7 months. Without your contributions, we wouldn't have such a wonderful lineup of webinars. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our moderator, Gurneet Dami.
Thanks so much, Marissa, for hosting this and inviting us and everyone that's really made this possible. And yeah, we have an awesome lineup. Honestly, we got so many questions, like hopefully you can cover it up, but we're definitely this is it's not a one-off conversation. This is one of many conversations to come, especially thinking about being in nutrition and dietetics. We really haven't had a platform like this, and we have a great multidisciplinary panel to really dive into different areas and when it comes to anti-oppression, anti-racism, diversity, inclusion, and so much more. I guess a little bit about myself. I am currently doing my master's in applied human nutrition at Mount St. Vincent University and all the way out east, but today I'm joining from Ontario, just north of Toronto, recognizing, I guess, adding on to land acknowledgement. I live in Woodbridge, that's also part of the Toronto Purchase, and my nearest Indigenous community in York Region is the Chippewas of Georgina Island and identifies being a Punjabi Sikh settler, doing anti-oppression, food security related work here. And without further ado, I'd really like to give the spotlight to our panelists. So we're gonna go in an order that will be the same order we go with our questions. And to start it off, we start off with Tanya Senk.
Miigwech. Ani Tanse Tanche Kiskio Tamuan Esqueo. Kendasa Winkwe Indigenakas. I am Métis, Cree, and Saulteaux from Treaty 4 area, Red River Métis. The Métis, Cree, and Saulteaux are known as the Three Sister Nations people of the Buffalo, and this was taught to me by Elder Maria Campbell. And I have a long lineage of Red River Métis, and I'm also a proud great-grandniece of Louis Riel. I was born in Toronto, and then returned to my mother's home community and was raised on the land in southeastern Saskatchewan. So I'd like to also just say thank you for the land acknowledgement, and I think very pertinent to this conversation that we're going to have today. that we're also in the dish with one spoon territory, which is an agreement by the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee, which I'll be speaking to later as well. I'm the centrally assigned principal for Indigenous education through the Urban Indigenous Education Center. I'm the principal of a K-12 Indigenous focused school here in Toronto called Kapapa Machkwe, Wandering Spirit School. And I'm also the board lead for Indigenous education with the Toronto District School Board, and really happy to be here today. Thank you, Miigwech.
Thank you, Tanya. And next we have Gifty Julis.
Hi, thank you. So as Gurneet mentioned, my name is Gifty Julis. I'm going to introduce myself based off how you suggested that we could introduce ourselves. So I'm going to start off by just saying what I do. So I'm currently a policy analyst at the Public Health Agency of Canada, specifically under the Center for Biosecurity. So long story short, I honestly just do a lot of national health security work, and it's been very rewarding, and it's with an awesome team. So that's been just super great. And something you suggested that we could speak about is how do we advocate, or are we an activist in our field? And I'd say that the way that I promote anti-oppression practice is through the workshops that I run. So I try to focus on health practitioners who are looking to just improve their practices. And most recently, I led a workshop for med students across Canada. And it was really rewarding from both perspectives because I learned so much from them. Like, even though I'm the one facilitating, I do these different roles in order to learn myself. So it was amazing to meet with them, and they're looking to improve the way that they serve older adults. So I thought that was great. I thought it aligned with my passion, so I was willing to help them out. Otherwise, I've been kind of on the research side of things, and just I recently published a study on the effectiveness of anti-oppression workshops to promote allyship. And we found a lot of interesting things, notably that you can't just rely on one workshop to get the results that you want. So anyway, that kind of work has been awesome. And I continue to do those type of studies till this day. And in terms of like, why is it helpful for me to be part of these discussions? Again, all part of learning. I love being able to hear different perspectives. I think these type of discussions help us be accountable to the fact that we can't be comfortable with the status quo. Like, there's so much that we can improve on. And I love having these spaces to hear from others, share my experience, share my lived and work experience. And again, I think these conversations definitely point us in the right direction, especially for the field of public health, which is where I'm coming from. So thank you again for having me. And I'm excited to hear your questions and hear from all the other panelists as well.
Yeah, for sure, Gifty. And that kind of leads us to Benson.
Hi, everyone. So I am speaking today from Toronto, so I appreciate the land acknowledgement, everyone there. So I'm going to do what Gifty did as well, kind of go into the intro that I was prepared. So my name is Ben. I'm a first-generation Chinese Canadian, and it's an incredible honor to share this platform with Anjum, Gifty, Tanya, and I want to thank Gurneet for moderating and everyone at NPC for making this happen. I want to clarify, although I'm honored to share the stage with everyone, I can't say that I'm happy to be here. The reality is I'm sad, angry, and frustrated that it took a pandemic and many innocent lives publicly lost to undeniably show the dangers of systemic racism across the world. It's for this reason I'm not going to be apologetic about my tone. I have been fighting for equality and social justice within the dietetic profession for over a decade now. Done this through various methods, including advocating for diversity representation while working with Dietitians Canada on their failed brand initiative project, creating action groups to petition for change, using my public platform as a national TV show host to publish blog posts exposing the systemic racism at Dietitians Canada, as well as governing provincial bodies, and more recently, very, very candid social media posts calling out the performative hypocrisies of these organizations. I'm well aware that these methods are not traditional. However, my experience is the traditional methods simply are not effective, even after a decade of persistence. It wasn't until I started making my traumatic experiences with these organizations public that many other dietitians of color started privately messaging me and reaching out to share the exact same story that I had. So my story is not unique, it's just public. every dietitian of color has been fighting for diversity and inclusion, only have the same things happen for them. And I want to remind everyone that insanity isn't doing different things, it's doing the same thing and expecting different results. I entered this profession with the goal of helping to empower people to take charge and change of their health, to help prevent and manage disease through food and lifestyle factors. I still have this goal, but the goal is now to make sure it's achieved for all Canadians as opposed to just a few. By improving the health of all Canadians, this profession and the health of Canada will be able to grow and thrive in the future. And I'm honored to be a part of that fight and that change.
No, for sure. Thanks, Ben. And yeah, just with everyone's conversation, it's really important to honor the truths, the stories that we have. And it's kind of like doing a survey, right? I think with our whole discussion, you want to know, it's always great to know what's working. We need to know what's not working to really improve that. And without further ado, like just introducing our last panelist, but not the least, and Soltana.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I just want to thank Nutrition Connections for the invite and for the opportunity to be here today. I'm currently calling in from Toronto, and I also identify as a first-generation Indian Canadian, a South Asian Canadian. My family, I was born in Hyderabad in India, and we first immigrated to Saudi Arabia, and then my family and I made our way here. And so I've been here ever since. And I like to share that story as a settler, as an immigrant, as you know, a young racialized woman in this space. And I will say, like, in the types of work that I do, I bring that identity because I often find, kind of similar to what Ben was speaking to, those experiences are not really present in different institutions. And what can happen is, if those perspectives are not there, what gets to be seen as professionalism, what gets to be seen as, you know, the mainstream kind of way of doing things, right? It's not fully representative of all the people on this land. And I guess, yeah, a bit about my background. I actually did my master's in public health a number of years ago. I spent some time in the think tank world and the applied research world, but I was itching to do something more with the research work that I was doing, and combining it with the organizing work I was doing with the Decent Work and Health Network and people organizing around OHIP for All. So an opportunity came up at the YWCA Canada a number of years ago, and I took it on, and it's been an incredible journey ever since. So currently I serve as a National Director of Public Policy and Strategic Communications at YWCA Canada, and we are the nation's largest and oldest gender equity organization. So really thinking about how gender is a social determinant of health, but also how does that connect to issues like housing and employment and decent work and immigration, and really ensuring that pan-Canadian perspective. I'll leave it here, but just to say, one of the pieces of work that I've led at YWCA Canada is our work on a feminist economic recovery plan. And one of the critical pillars of that plan is systemic racism, addressing it, because we can't have an economic recovery in a climate of hate, violence, discrimination, and racism. And so I'm glad to kind of have the opportunity to be alongside colleagues here and talk about some of that work of what needs to be done and where we can all organize together.
Oh, for sure. Thank you, Anjum. And I guess, yeah, just to start us off in the same order that we introduced ourselves, give our bio. First question I kind of have is, do you find yourself surviving or thriving in your current situation? So thinking about yourself, I guess your personal identity, the social location you have, also professionally as a member, that you do have that personal identity of being a member of the BIPOC community, but in your professional role, the workplaces you work at, maybe even the personal spaces you occupy and live in and support, how do you see yourself surviving or thriving? Or are we focusing more on one before we can get to the other? And I guess I'll start off with Tanya.
Thank you. I think that they kind of go hand in hand, and depending on the context and the situation. So what I'd further like to talk about that in the role that we do at the Urban Indigenous Education Center, we operate within 7 pillars or 7 domains, 7 canopies. And that's providing holistic wraparound services for Indigenous students and families. And when I mean holistic, I mean the mind, intellectual, the body, physical, the heart, emotional, and the spirit, spiritual, in terms of centering Indigenous ways of knowing and being. We also provide professional learning. We do community engagement, partnerships, research and innovation, and curriculum and development. And a part of that is addressing anti-Indigenous racism in all of its facets, and anti-oppression. With regard to that, we do a lot of work on cultural safety and trauma-informed practices through an Indigenous lens to discuss the ongoing impact of colonization. And one of the greatest factors in this is the erasure of Indigenous peoples and indigeneity in what we know of today as Canada. So working with that, and the work that we're doing through the urban Indigenous education, particularly with regard to this area, as an intergenerational survivor of residential schools, the nutrition plays a huge part in terms of the atrocities that occurred during residential schools. So I'd like to say that the recently retired Senator Murray Sinclair, who was a High Commissioner on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's Calls to Action, said that it's education that got us into this mess, and it's education that will be the way forward. And one of the things that we're doing at the Urban Indigenous Education Center is really trying to go beyond food security into Indigenous food sovereignty. And so the fundamental difference between food security and food sovereignty is that food security seeks to address the issue of food and hunger through the current dominant food regime, whereas food sovereignty challenges the paradigm, and it seeks to build alternatives and attempts to address the root causes through a bottom-up grassroots approach in order to look at the ideological underpinnings of food sovereignty. And so we must first understand this in relation to food security. And this is one of the areas that we are addressing in developing literacy around this, and an understanding of the those colonial impacts of what's known as the 5 white gifts, which is sugar and salt and milk and lard and flour, that were rations that were given to Indigenous people that have contributed to diabetes and other health factors. So that's some of the work that we do. Am I thriving and surviving? I think that what keeps me going in this work, obviously, is working in community and working in relationship. And through the Indigenous Center, we also have the opportunity to work with a council of elders, knowledge keepers, and traditional teachers that help support the work in centering Indigenous ways of knowing and being in that relationality, understanding that everything is related, everything has a spirit, and everything is alive, and practicing gratitude. And trying to work through that as we continue to create the conditions that can potentially lead to transformation for better outcomes within the very colonial institutions that we are working and operating within. So what keeps things going is the opportunity to be able to be immersed in this work, and as an Indigenous person, immersed in community, and this deep understanding of what relationality means, and that relationality to the earth. We talk about land acknowledgements, and one of the things is that acknowledging Mother Earth, the land and the air and the water, that Indigenous law is the land and the air and the water, and that Mother Earth is like an information platform, and we need to listen very carefully, and thinking about everything that we do now has implications for the future, and thinking of seven generations thinking. So those are the things that keep you surviving and thriving within the current context of this global pandemic. And we are really learning, I think, a lot from this pandemic that we're trying to move through.
No,
And not all of us are in the same boat, because some of us are in steam cruisers and yachts, some of us are in canoes, some of us are in dinghies, and some of us are just trying to stay afloat while others are perishing. So with that, thank you.
no, thank you, Tanya. And I think that's a really great way to ground it. Like, yeah, really think of the relationship to the land, think about and recognizing privilege, definitely thinking about the pandemic and trying to like meeting people where they're at, but also not disregarding the history, especially when we think about colonization isn't just of the past, it's continually happening, and we need to continue work on decolonizing in our workplaces, personally, professionally, everything in between. So yeah, it really comes back to if I hope others are reflecting on what Tanya said, and if you're in nutrition or other health professions and maybe you didn't hear this in class or in your workplace, like think about why we aren't talking about that, and if that's something missing in your learning, that's something we all need to be on the same page about, and especially when it comes to decolonizing as a collective. And that kind of brings me to Gifty, and if you can, yeah, elaborate on like how you see yourself surviving and thriving personally and professionally.
Thank you. And thank you, Tanya. That was very powerful. I'd say, you know what? I was going to start off by saying, I think I'm thriving. I think that we're, moving in a certain direction that I will get to in a second. But I think it's really important to be extremely honest on these platforms and saying that I do feel like I've been surviving for the longest time, for sure. And of course, throughout the pandemic, as Tanya mentioned, it's an opportunity that a lot of people have leveraged to reflect and to think a lot. And that's why you saw all those protests that were happening after the murder of George Floyd. And I feel like for Black communities as well, it wasn't just a reflection period for everyone else. It was a reflection period for Black communities who are exposed now, and their traumas and triggers are out there and in the public, and they can't escape it now. And I think I can speak to that personally, that prior to, I would say, all the protests that were happening, consistently being thrown in my face that all these things were happening, even though I already knew that, I found that it definitely allowed me to realize that I was comfortable to maybe talk about these issues that we were telling everyone about, while also, I hope I don't lose my train of thought here, and I want to stick to your question, but I just have so much to say. But essentially, I'm going to recap a little bit. I'm going to say that I have been surviving. The pandemic definitely exposed a lot of my emotions. Prior to this, I did feel comfortable to verbalize certain things, but I realized I wasn't checking in with my own mental health at all until I was forced to do so. But I think now, entering maybe a little bit of a new year in 2021, I've been doing a lot of more reflective practices and trying to understand, okay, what can I do to cope? Who can I look to for support, and who are my role models? And I found that through those different strategies, I've been able to say that now exposing or discussing anti-oppressive practice is something where I feel like I'm hyper cautiously optimistic about it. And the reason I say it specifically that way is because there's a woman, for those who don't know, Selena Caesar Chavenis. She's a former member of parliament. She currently works at Queen's University, which is, fun fact, my alma mater as well. And she is just so great. She's one of my role models for sure. And she said that I am hyper cautiously optimistic. And I thought, okay, that is exactly it. Because at the end of the day, even though it's extremely hard, there is a certain level of optimism that has to stick within us in order to progress and in order to improve the status quo. But you're not going to do that in a way where you're super excited and you're like, okay, I'm going to have this discussion with people and I'm going to change everyone's perspective and everyone's going to be incredible. Yay. Like that. I think that even though that's ideal, that's not realistic. You kind of have to go into these conversations saying, okay, I'm going to speak the truth. I'm going to speak about my lived experiences and my work experiences. Hope that I'm able to tap into certain people's empathy and then not beat myself up about the fact that like I can't do that with everyone, because not everyone is interested in learning, relearning, unlearning, and you just can't put that on you, because that's where you start to forget about your own care and your own mental health. So with that, I would say for now, I'm thriving a bit. And again, I'm not a huge fan of when we say these are timely discussions, because as Ben alluded to earlier, they're not timely at all. However, we can't ignore the fact that we are currently placed in a situation where people are a little bit more interested in learning or in hearing, listening a little bit. So we can't ignore that. We have to leverage that. We have to take advantage of it. So it's for that reason as well, I'd say that I'm thriving. I'd say ever since all the protests happen, I've been reached out by a lot of people who are saying, can you have these important dialogues with us, because we're really interested, we're doing the research, and we want to have someone who's familiar with this while also expressing their lived experience to help us bring these conversations further and turn them into action. And that I respect. So that's another reason why I'd say I'm thriving. So I'm actually given a platform where I can express myself and hear from other people as well. So thank you for asking that question. It's a good reflective practice for all of us to realize how we're actually feeling these days. So thank you again.
No, for sure, Gifty. And like, yeah, like it's all, I guess, yeah, the floor is always open, and we need to be open to these critiques. We need to, yeah, I guess really think about where we are at. Like, you know, sometimes when you see opportunities, are like, okay, awesome, not everyone's going to listen to me, but who's actually going to listen? And there's no point of beating yourself up just because what you're saying is meaningful and it's true, but maybe it's not the right set of people. Maybe people just aren't at the right mental space or mindset just to get it. So, you know, we really have to think and care for ourselves before we can, you know, doing the work is one thing, but doing the work on an empty cup, it needs to also be filled along the way. So it's really great what you added on to with what Tanya mentioned earlier. Kind of brings us to Ben. So yeah, how I know you alluded to a lot of things in your bio. Yeah, just thinking about surviving part, the thriving part, and how you kind of see that personally and professionally, specifically, I guess, for yourself in dietetics.
Yeah, I guess I got to be honest here, just surviving and barely surviving, so to speak. As everyone probably is very, very well aware, this coronavirus is heavily correlated with China and anti-Asian, anti-Chinese hate crimes and all that kind of stuff. In fact, the NYPD reported this year alone, the amount of Asian American hate crimes, the reported ones rose by 1,900%. Now that's reported, keeping in mind that a lot of people of color typically don't rely on these systems to report hate crimes or anything that happens out of fear of retaliation or whatever, or the lived experiences that many people of color have when going to systems, all these kind of things, which is why, these systems need to be challenged, because if we have to participate in these kind of systems to change it, it's just not going to work anymore. I do want to thank Tanya for bringing up residential schools, because of course, on the cusp of Nutrition Month, which is March, it's one of those important things where obviously Dietitians of Canada and dietitians in general, and you pointed this out, Granit, this has never been discussed, the role of dietitians in residential schools and how horrific that role was. And obviously they would much rather brush it under the rug. So I'm obviously looking forward to hoping to do a little bit of justice with a little bit of content around that role of dietitians, and what we are actually celebrating and what we have to acknowledge in order to have that truth and reconciliation to move forward and kind of acknowledge it. But unfortunately, the issue is the majority of what's being done is these issues are being handled as PR issues and swept under the rug. So yeah, it's obviously that is a very difficult thing, and surviving at the very, very bare minimum, just because it's a difficult thing to be in this profession, to constantly say, this isn't right, this is not okay, and you're missing these huge area gaps, to look at every diabetes research paper and say that diabetes is 3 to 4 times higher in immigrant populations, people of color populations. To me, it's just to say that this profession has failed in those populations entirely, and that they're doing nothing different to address it. And that's And to echo the words of Gifty, like cautiously optimistic, because we've seen these promises before. Every person of color has seen these promises before, and then it always just seems one step forward and 2 steps back. So we'll see what happens, but surviving is the answer that I'm going to give you, Gurneet.
Mm-hmm. No, that's totally fair. And like, yeah, just being open and honest, because yeah, we end up seeing a lot of things and we're like, oh, cool, statement. We never seen this before. And like, what's gonna happen next? But the words are one thing, actions need to follow. And sometimes, and we can't silence people for speaking out. And if you don't like what you're hearing, and this is a negative feedback you're hearing, and it's been going on for years and it has been swept under rug, it's something we need to call into attention and not let this cycle viciously go on and on and on. Because a pretty photo with a lot of people from different backgrounds isn't going to solve anything. You need to have that deep discussion and creating those spaces for sure. And I'm just wondering, Anjum, like for yourself, I guess, yeah, thinking about your role, and you mentioned your own journey to where we are today, personally and professionally, like how do you see yourself surviving and thriving?
Yeah, thank you. And, you know, I was mentioning this before we started the webinar. It was such a pleasure to be here because Ontario Public Health Association and, you know, the community around it was a very big part of my journey a number of years ago. And I think Pegina is on the call here. So I just want to kind of say hi to her and thank you. I was part of the New Professionals Network and was like co-chairing with one of my colleagues, Zinia Baltiwala. And so, yeah, I just think about like kind of where I was at that moment in time and where I am now. And, you know, what has been critical to my growth and my journey has been community. And Tanya spoke about this, right? The importance of community, of relationships. And you know, in these very isolating times, in these very challenging times, I think that's something I've been really leaning into and has been so crucial to me. And I think has enabled, you know, that conversation about surviving or thriving. It is because of the community, my loved ones, the people around me who I call close, that has sustained me during this time. And what I'm interested is starting to look more outward. I'll say like in 2020 with the pandemic, I very much was, you know, primarily talking to the people I was already talking to, right? The people who are already part of my life. But now I'm really interested in 2021 to start to kind of push myself and talk to new people. And I think part of it is just like when you're kind of in a Zoom environment, right? You can't really network and connect and talk to people in the ways that you would normally. It doesn't happen as spontaneously. But I think what I'm trying to do now is connect with others in that very intentional way. And it's been really fantastic. I think, you know, some of the points raised here is we've seen in the last number of months a lot of important positive affirmations of support and solidarity. But now, you know, the rubber has to hit the road. Are we actually going to see action? Is all of this going to be codified? And that's where I am also optimistic. Over the last number of months, as part of the work that I've been doing at YWCA Canada, we've been calling for an intersectional feminist response and recovery to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we've started to see some of that organizing and advocacy start to lead to you know, change in terms of the political kind of priority setting. First, it was the words. Then we started to see some money roll out in the fall economic statement. And now, you know, I'm really looking towards the federal budget to see, are we actually going to talk about systemic racism and actually put money behind it? I think that's like the big piece. You know, one of the big priorities of YWCA Canada has been around childcare. And to be honest, people have been calling for this for half a century. But I think with this pandemic, what it has created is all of these issues are undeniable, right? How essential the care economy is. So I'm hopeful, but I think for me, that hope, you know, that satisfaction I will see is dependent on if I see the money actually, you know, link up with the words that people are saying. But I think what has been getting me through this time is connection, community, and investing in myself and the people around me. And I think, you know, it has been a very reflective moment about what truly matters. So yeah, I think I've been in that kind of headspace for the last couple of months.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I guess like even on the point with you made about being intentional of the connections we're making and, you know, going maybe outside the box of maybe I wouldn't usually talk to that person or I wouldn't usually mesh in that area. Like at the end of the day, we're all connected. We're all in this society. It doesn't go back to like, this is the only thing, I only want to be a dietitian, so I'm only dietetics. No, everything is connected to food. And like thinking about health, like there's so much connections you can make with everyone all around, and just like hearing the similarities we have and like things we're building on even from this multidisciplinary discussion. And I guess even on the point of thriving and surviving, I remember I wrote a blog way back when, and there was a point of when you think about these things, being critical. And when you bring up criticality, very easy, it's denoted with people first think it's negative, but it's without being critical, we wouldn't have the change that we have even today. If you don't have that criticality, that's like the missing piece to really kind of bring things together. So someone's saying something a little bit out there and maybe you don't like what they're hearing or what they're saying, kind of get to the bottom of it. Don't just shut it off. It's shutting it off that's led to a lot of things coming out, and it just bursts afterwards. So I guess thinking like everyone's really grounded the discussion of how you're surviving and thriving. And I guess a lot of questions we also got were just from people, maybe they're emerging professionals, maybe these are people that have been in the profession, whether it's health, education, policy, everything in between. Like, what advice do you have for professionals that really want to, I guess, advocate, be activists, and promote that anti-oppression type of training and approaches, maybe in their workplaces, maybe they're the only ones, maybe they're only like BIPOC individual in their workplace, or maybe they're in a rural area, or maybe you don't really know where to start, but you have these feelings that you might talk personally with and with friends. So how do we get this more, I guess, as a daily, like putting it on the agenda daily? And I guess I'll start with you, Tanya.
Thank you. One of the things I'd like to say, since you're asking what advice we might have for emerging professionals about anti-racism and anti-oppression and this type of work is self-care is really important, and that holistic self-care that I was speaking to around the mind, the body, the heart, and the spirit, and relationship and community, and working with people who are supportive of the work that you do and that you work together and stand side by side in this work. I've been doing this for quite some time. You know, I've been through all different kinds of situations, and colonial fatigue is very real, and compounded with pandemic fatigue, compounded with reconciliation fatigue. It can be very, very tiring. So you have to have that hope and that optimism. And to speak back to what was being said earlier on about being cautiously optimistic and hopeful, you really need to turn to the people that you do this work with to keep each other strong and stand together to do this work in order to address the systemic and structural infrastructure that exists that creates these oppressive environments. A lot of talk has been done about this, and we know what the barriers are. It's action to disentangle ourselves from these, unravel these systemic and structural systems that continue to marginalize vulnerable, racialized, and Indigenous peoples. So a lot of it will have to do with continued education, but there has to be political will, and the power privilege conversation continues to happen. So the political will is that people in power need to be able to give up some of that power and look at a shared construct of dealing with anti-oppression within these structures to move forward. That's basically what I can say at this time. I'm going to say that the work is not easy. We know that. It's very challenging. It's very difficult. Being a reflective practitioner, always looking at what the challenges are, what the opportunities are, what the limitations are, and having those real sort of courageous conversations with oneself and with others. And for me, as an Indigenous person, I do look to Indigenous ways of knowing and being to be able to continue the work that I do. So grounded in that, grounded in relationship, grounded in ceremony, which has been difficult to do under the current environment with the pandemic and us not being able to come together and break Bannock, so to speak. But some of the things that do keep me going for sure are continuing to try and walk in a good way, which is called Minaba Madzuin, and trying to center those 7 sacred teachings of love and respect and courage, honesty, wisdom and humility and truth, and continuing to be in a Gitchitak way. Ogitchita is an Anishinaabe word that means warrior, but not a warrior as in fighter, as a defender, as a protector. And it really comes from this notion of big heart. And I've heard many elders say that the journey from the head to the heart is probably one of the longest journeys we'll ever encounter, and be continued to this journey in terms of, as was said previously, learning to unlearn, to relearn. Miigwech.
Thank you, Tanya. That was really powerful. And yeah, it just really goes to show the role that we have to reconcile with ourselves, with Indigenous communities, with the land we're on. Like, it really goes back from, can be small actions, but that really makes a movement and can lead to much more discussion and much more ritual discussion and actions to follow. And I guess just being mindful of time, I guess we can, Anjum and Gifty have to leave a little earlier. So I can just go to Gifty and then we can go to Anjum and then go to Ben. Just, yeah, checking in. Yeah, what's some advice that you have? And for professionals, like maybe don't want to do the work that you're doing, like how do we get there and what can we do with our current situations that we might be in?
Well, I'd say in general that like as health professionals, if we do not recognize the importance of being allies in our roles, then we're doing a complete disservice to the communities that we serve. Because we need to honestly check ourselves and realize how much power we actually hold in the healthcare field and how people are relying on you all to be culturally competent, to be empathetic, to empower the people that you're serving. And it's up to everyone here as emerging professionals to make sure that you're consistently learning from the mistakes of the previous cohort. We can't just keep going through the same cycle. It just doesn't make sense, as Ben was saying. And I'd like to bring up, honestly, a little example. Why not? So this is a personal one, but I'm happy to share. So essentially, I went to the doctor's office a couple of weeks ago. And so I have to go into a walk-in doctor because my actual doctor lives in Ottawa. Long story short. That's where I am. And so I went in because I had a question about something that was on my skin, and I was really uncomfortable with what I was seeing, and I was ignoring it for so long because honestly, deep down, I was like, I don't even trust what's about to be said to me. But it got to the point where I said, I have no choice because of these people that have this power. I need to go to them and just trust that something will be said that's productive. So I go into the clinic. And then I have a doctor, he's Caucasian Canadian, and we were speaking. I explained to him everything, I showed him everything. I'm gonna wrap up a little bit with that. And he said, oh, those are just stretch marks. And I said, okay, so for the years that I've been here ignoring this thing that's growing on my skin, you're telling me it's stretch marks. And in the moment, I didn't say anything, but I think he could clearly tell in my facial expression that sounded ridiculous to me. Right off the bat, I was like, this is lacking empathy, you're lacking cultural competence. I don't know what's going on. It just seems like I don't know. I was just really frustrated. And he honestly got to a point where on his own, he looked at me, he said, you know what, Gifty, if I'm going to be extremely honest with you, I normally do see patients very quickly, but I want to take a second and tell you that I'm very ashamed of the fact that the medical institution hasn't actually taken the time, the ownership to study African Canadian skin. And I'm very sorry for that. And I feel ashamed to admit this to you, but I will do better. But I can tell you right now, I'm unable to tell you what this is, but I'm happy to refer you to a specialist if that's what you would like. And if I'm being very honest with you all, I was mind blown with what he said. That was the bare minimum. That was a bare minimum comment, but I was mind blown because I've never had service where I felt like I wasn't being silenced, or service that I've not never, but it's rare that I have service where I'm not being marginalized or disempowered. So I thought that was incredible. And I feel like, and I hope that that is a motivational story, very short story. Of course, there's more details to it, but I thought that was, that is the type of learning that we need to consistently apply in the work that we do every single day. And I was gonna say as well that my partner was reading How to Be an Anti-Racist, and I really liked a concept that was brought up in that book related to anti-racism versus racism. And I want to apply that to anti-oppression. And I want to say to emerging professionals that you only have two options. You can either be anti-oppressive or you're an oppressor and you are oppressive. And when you're anti-oppressive, that means that you're allergic, you're intolerant of all oppressive behaviors, oppressive policies, oppressive structures. You're consistently doing the work to challenge those things, as Gurneet was saying. And I feel like you only have that, or you're someone who's okay with how things are, you're not saying anything, or you're part of the people who are literally actively trying to diminish other communities. So there's only two options here. And I think it's up to you on which way you would like to decide to take your career as we're emerging into this new field. And I was also going to say, let's be honest, we're gonna make mistakes, right? Like we are gonna make mistakes. And at this point, we can't sit there and be like, okay, well, I'm just not gonna try again. No, be comfortable with the fact that you made that mistake and take that as something that, honestly, be proud that you made that mistake. And because now you know that you won't be doing that again, and you want to be grateful for those moments. So that was just like another word of encouragement. And then I have two more points. I'm really sorry. For the sake of time, there's so much to say. I'm sure we all have so much to say, but something that I find lately, we're getting stuck in this mentality that we must create safe spaces. And hear me out. I think that's fair. I get why we're saying safe spaces, because we want to make people at the table comfortable, right? However, I like that some other people these days have been calling it brave spaces instead of safe spaces. Because if you get caught up in the word safe, you begin to forget that, no, we're supposed to challenge these things. We're supposed to feel uncomfortable, because that's when you know something is happening. The wheels are spinning a bit. So try not to get too stuck on the safe spaces part, and try to be brave. Be brave to stand up against microaggressions. Be brave to stand up against blatant racism. Be brave to stand up against anything that's oppressive. Like I said, you have two options: anti-oppression or oppression. And then the last thing I was going to say, when it comes to being in maybe someone in my role where I do run workshops on anti-oppressive practice with health professionals, I find that it's really crucial that you try your best to find a balance between resonating with the audience and making sure you're not losing the essence of why you're there in the first place. And the reason I say that is because it's so easy to, let's say I'm the only racialized person in the room, I'm speaking to a group of non-racialized people. It's so easy to be like, okay, how can I make them feel like they understand what I'm saying? Like, how do I mold what I'm saying to them? And then you lose why you're there in the first place. You lose your lived experiences. So you need to find that sweet spot where you're able to maybe bring up statistics and facts that are happening maybe in their space. Like, let's say we're in Toronto, bring up Toronto statistics because they're there. Bring up statistics of what's happening in the people's backyards that you're speaking to, but then also don't forget why you're in that position in the first place, because you felt that this matters a lot and I need to speak up about these things. So again, there's a balance to it. It's really tough because you're not doing persuasion, you know, like you're not supposed to convince them to understand. That's not the point, but you also do want to capture their attention and you want to have impact there. So that's where I'm going to leave it for that. Sorry, I went so long over, I don't know, our allocated time there, but.
Oh, all really important, Gifty. And yeah, just like leave it to Anjum just to add on to that as well.
Yeah, Gifty, that was fantastic. I was taking notes, but also I could listen to you all day. So please, I hope there's more opportunities for me to be connecting and chatting with you further. I guess kind of what I wanted to share was around leadership is not a title, it's a mindset. So wherever you are, you have the opportunity in the sphere of influence you have to make an impact. And there's so many different ways. So I'd say for all folks who are listening, think about, where do you show up? Is there a way that you can bring these conversations to those places, whether it's friends groups, at your workplace, in your volunteer group, in your faith community, in different types of communities you may be part of? That's an opportunity for you to make an impact. I think sometimes it feels like you have to have a certain title or a certain position in an organization. No, anywhere you are, you can make an impact. So that's one thing I wanted to share. The second is really the value of skills-based volunteerism, especially for emerging leaders. One of the things I really encourage people is to go out and see if there's a way that you can give back and also hone your skills. Is there a way for you to participate on a professional, in your kind of profession kind of committee, in a board opportunity? Maybe there's like community groups that you can be a part of, where you can not only give back, but hone your skills, because sometimes in the places of work that you may be in, you may be hampered in some shape or form. You may not be getting those stretch opportunities. You may not be getting those, that ability to showcase your full scope of skills. But that doesn't mean you can't actually do it. You can do it in different ways. So that's something I'd really encourage folks. If you have the ability to or desire to, skills-based volunteerism is something that is good for you, good for the community, but also enables your success so you can continue to move forward in the work that you want to do. And I think the last thing I'll mention is around supplier diversity. So whatever type of organization or institution or affiliation you have, are you fighting to ensure more Black, Indigenous, and racialized communities are getting access to contracts, are getting access to opportunities, queer communities, people living with disabilities? As an organization, sometimes I do a lot of advocacy to the government, but we also are thinking internally at our organization, how do we do even more investments in diverse equity seeking groups? And one of the ways to do that is through your suppliers, your vendors, the different people you hire internally, but also work with externally. So I'll leave it there, but hopefully those three things are something that you can take with you as tools in your toolbox to fight for that kind of systemic change wherever you are.
Oh, for sure, Anjum. And I guess like just on your point too, it just reminds me, my mom has a lot of Punjabi sayings, and one thing that just kind of came up the other day was like a lamp is lit by another lamp. And that just kind of goes to show the importance of helping others and just building on the powerful conversation we're having here and just lighting up more lamps. And when we can all be very conscious and we know what's up, and the darkness kind of goes away once all the lamps are lit, and it's just starting from here. And I guess just closing off the panel discussion with then, just adding on advice of what you've been doing and what others can learn and, work on as well.
I guess I can share the best piece of advice I ever got from one of my dietitian mentors, and I hope she can hear this because I really do appreciate it. I don't see if she's a part of the panel, but this piece of advice came to me during my internship, which is a systemic oppression in its own right. But during the internship, it was very, very quickly discovered that I was not conforming to what they wanted me to do because they just wanted me to fall in line. So what this dietitian mentor told me was do whatever you need to do to become a dietitian, play their game, do whatever, and then do whatever the hell you want afterwards. Don't be afraid to call things out. I really want to echo those words of Gifty and Tanya in the sense where this is we're not supposed to make this comfortable for other people. Think about that for a second. Why are we making our pain and trauma digestible for other people so that they can take us seriously. That's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. We've been fighting for this for decades now. Everyone has. And it's getting to a point now where it's not to polarize things, but Gifty's absolutely right. You're either supporting a corrupt and oppressive system or you're fighting against it. There is no middle ground anymore. And for the middle ground people, sorry to say this, but you're supporting an oppressive system. You really are if you think that we have to worry about tone, we have to worry about people's feelings. No, we're talking about your one fragile feelings compared to an entire population of people that have been oppressed first and continue to be oppressed. And the evidence is very, very clear in front of us. So it's not about us making it comfortable for anyone else to digest. It's for you to critically analyze and think about what your limitations are and how you're contributing, and not to put that work on people of color. There's a couple of famous quotes I want to share with everyone, with what Gifty and Tanya and Juno has said. The first one comes from actually a transformative trip to the Berlin Wall back before the pandemic, when people could travel. And that quote written on the Berlin Wall was that those, and it was written in German, so I have to do a rough translation, and I'm modifying it so it's more inclusive of all genders. But those that want the world to remain as it is do not want the world to remain as all. We have to accept change is inevitable because this current system is broken for everyone else other than the people it was designed for. It's very clear that that's the case. And we have to remember, comfort is the enemy of growth. I beg all people looking at this to really, really pick a side and to fall on the right side of history, because it's gone on for way too long. The evidence is there, and we are failing Canadians. We're failing our own profession. We're doing a disservice to it. It's the horrors. It's just, we don't have enough time to go over it all. And like you said, Gurneet, and everyone else, this is not one conversation. It's multiple conversations that are going to happen over and over and over again. And we have to be comfortable making mistakes. Lord knows I've made a lot of public mistakes. You only get stronger with that. And that's transparency. That's what we look at. That's what leadership looks like, is recognizing and owning up to our mistakes and doing better, not hiding them and sweeping them under a rug, not censoring everything, spinning everything like a PR piece and all those kind of things. No, stop making excuses. Just accept the fact that you're wrong. Stop, and then do better. Find resources, do better. It's just, yeah, comfort's the enemy of growth.
No, for sure. Thank you, Ben. And yeah, just kind of summarizing, I guess, can't do this justice in a minute of everything what we talked about. But yeah, just really thinking about where we are right now and having this discussion. On one note, yeah, we're having this, it's great, we have this space. On another note, it's unfortunate that it took so long, and having these spaces and advocating for it. And you know, sometimes you see people on the screen, you're like, okay, awesome, they're making it, they're doing things, but there's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of healing going on, and that's something we really need to understand and create spaces for. And if someone's hurting and things need to change, it shouldn't just be up to one person to voice that. Everyone needs to be conscious about it. There's like ignorance, you can't plead to ignorance anymore, and nor should we. And if you get called out, sometimes you get called out, sometimes you get called in, sometimes you get called on. And that's something that we need to think about more, work on, because you can either be a part of the problem or part of the solution, but being defensive about the problem isn't getting us anywhere. And I guess on that note, I just wanted to, unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but I guess closing the panel, really thanking everyone for honoring their time and sharing the stories. And, you know, it only starts from this conversation, many conversations light up. And I just hope that everyone really takes the moment to reflect and following up. Like next time, you know, people post things online. So if you're posting things, think about before posting, what am I actually doing for BLM? What am I doing against anti-Indigenous racism or anti-Asian racism? Posting is easy. The actions are the hard part. So it's something definitely to think about. And I guess I'll send it off to Marissa, and I guess any closing remarks from Nutrition Connections.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. I know we've lost a couple of our panelists that had to jump on the line, but thank you, Ben. Thank you, Tanya, for sharing your experiences, your insights. Definitely hope we can connect with you in the future and maybe host more events or continue to learn and do better. And then I really wanted to thank Gurneet too for moderating and how you've really been leading the dietetic profession along with Ben towards breaking this new ground. So with that, I just wanted to point out too in our chat box, our speakers and moderator have graciously given us their contact information and are happy to connect with our attendees to if you want to engage in further discussion. So make sure you check that out before leaving. We'll also be sending out an email with a survey link. Takes about 2 minutes to complete. And again, in case you missed it in the chat box, we'll include the contact information there. So thank you everyone for attending today. And I hope you have a really great weekend.
Miigwech, Marissa, my camera is not on, but that's okay. Nobody needs to see my face before we go. But I want to say thank you to all the other panelists. I was knocked out for 5 minutes, so I don't know what happened in the past 5, but I'm sure we'll catch up. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to the panelists, NPC again, Gurneet, for moderating, everyone like that. And just the final kind of point to point out, obviously the DC dietitians are going through a CEO change currently. And I hate to point out that they're making the exact same mistakes to choose the new CEO. They're exact same people, the headhunting agencies, exact same thing. We'll see what happens, but this is why people like me and Gifty say we're cautiously optimistic, because Natalie was great. She was a fantastic CEO. She's a fantastic leader, and I hope that the next CEO could genuinely have the integrity and ability, the same one, if not better than Natalie, to continue on the change that she has created. But it's really sad to see her go. But we'll have to see what happens in the next little bit. But they're about to make the same mistakes they've always made, so watch out for that.
Hi everybody, I'm going to turn the video off now, okay? Thank you.